Hello, I think we are now online. Hi, this is Rob Morris from the More Freedom Foundation. I just wanted to do a quick response to some of the things that have been happening in. This is Rob Morris from the More Freedom Foundation. I just wanted to do a. Sorry, just handling some of the technical details here. I wanted to respond to some of the recent events in Syria. There has been a lot of speculation, a lot of talk about what is going on there. And the talk seems to be going in a, OMG, this is World War III direction. And normally that kind of thing is limited to the sort of wilder fringes of the internet. But now I'm beginning to see it creep into the discussions of more mainstream commentators and more mainstream outlets. And I think the main message that I want to get across today is that World War III is not going to start in Syria. What may happen is quite horrible. Terrible for the Syrian people, terrible for the region, terrible for the United States and US soldiers, but we're not going to end up in a World War III situation. And the main reason for that is that Russia isn't that stupid. So to review, what has happened recently is that the US government has started attacking Assad regime elements at a much higher clip. Now, the United States, under both the Trump and Obama administrations, has taken out Assad regime military elements before. But these were sort of usually one-off events, either something that was apologized for or something that was meant to be in retaliation to something very specific, such as the recent alleged chemical attack. But now things are happening much more quickly. For the first time, US military shot down a Syrian warplane. And then just a couple days later, I believe that was over the weekend, and then just a day or two later, they took out I've heard different reports on this, a regime-affiliated drone. So things are escalating. Things are getting more serious. And for the past couple months, we have had a more significant boots-on-the-ground element within Syria. This is worrisome. This is deeply, deeply problematic. But it's not going to result in World War III. Now, Russia's response to these actions against the Syrian warplane was to say that US planes are now going to be targeted by Russian military forces. Now, I don't quite understand like the technical aspects of all that, but it does not mean what it initially sounds like to me as a layman. It doesn't mean they're going to be targeting and shooting down US planes left and right. It means that they're going to treat them differently in the context of their radar and tracking. I think that, again, the sort of deconfliction hotline has been shut down. These are real problems. This is a really, really bad thing. But in order to get a true World War III type situation, multi-fronts, problems in the US, problems in Europe, greater problems, I think we're talking about a potential US-Russia conflict. And I simply don't believe that's going to happen because it's not in Putin's interest. I think what's going on here is sort of an old-fashioned Cold War kind of brinksmanship thing. We're going to challenge each other and we're going to look tough, completely pointless. There's no real, I mean, to say more broadly and briefly, there is no reason for the United States to be in Syria. I believe the United States has done more than any other country to create this disastrous civil war. And the fact that we're participating in this horror show at all is really, really, really troubling. But leaving that aside, this is sort of old-fashioned brinksmanship, and Russia just simply does not have the ability to go over the edge. Because if they do go over the edge, if this escalates in Syria between Russia and the United States, Russia will very quickly lose. And Vladimir Putin's whole justification for his regime at this point is the fact that he's making Russia great again, that he's this military, he's reasserting Russia's old military pride and power, and that's what's really going on. But the assets that Russia has in Syria are very obvious. They're the kinds of targets that the US military has wanted to be able to shoot for years and hasn't been able to since Iraq in 2003. They've got fighter planes. They've got a big naval base on the Mediterranean. Taking those elements out would be very easy for the United States, and that would leave Putin with wreckage. His sort of whole heroic Russia taking back its space in the world would be destroyed rather quickly. So I just don't think that the Russia-US conflict can escalate further. That does not mean that this is not potentially horrific. Were there too many knots there? This situation is potentially horrific. This is exactly the problem that this presents exactly the problem that I was talking about in a video I did about a year back called What Happens If the US Wins in Syria? For the US public, winning in Syria means taking out ISIS. For the US government, Obama administration, Trump administration, and the administrations before that, for them, victory has always been defined as sticking it to Iran and taking out the Syrian regime. If that happens, things will become quite horrific quite quickly. There's another strand in sort of the establishment discussion of the recent events that I also object to. They are sort of saying, well, we always heard that if we just took out a couple Syrian planes, then Assad would get in line and it'd be easy to deal with. And they're now trying to say that both the Russians and Assad are stronger than we thought. I do not think that is true. I think both Assad and the Russians are very, very weak in Syria. And I think that it would be very easy, very quickly, to wipe both Russia and Syria off of the map if we chose to do that, which would be a terrible, terrible mistake. What I haven't mentioned thus far in this video is Iran. I actually desperately want the United States to normalize its relationship with Iran. Now, Iran does have targets that would be easy for the United States to hit in Syria, but it does not have, but that's not the root of their power in Syria. The root of their power in Syria is militias. They have a large group of affiliated Shia militias. There's Hezbollah from Lebanon. There are militias from Iraq. There are militias from Iran, or I guess would that be the Republican Guard? No need to go into the details. They've got Shia militias from Afghanistan. These folks can not necessarily blend into the Syrian population, but they can put themselves into Syrian populations. They create targets that can't be hit by US planes. It would require a large-scale US intervention. It would require another Iraq. And I don't think that the US public will stand for that. Also, there's no reason for us to be there because, as I've emphasized over and over again in my series on Syria, despite the fact that Assad is a very, very bad man, what would come next would be worse, would be so much worse. And it's as the rebel elements in Syria have continued to fail, they've gotten more extreme. Idlib, which is sort of the heart of the non-ISIS revolution that's left, I think more and more, it's becoming more and more dominant. From what I've been reading recently, it seems like Al-Qaeda is more and more dominant within that section. So what we're talking about is a situation where if the United States chose to escalate, Russia could be very quickly wiped off the map. The Assad regime would very quickly fall. And Iran, just as they have been in Iraq, would stay. Iran would be there. So as ridiculous as I think it is that the US continues to aim itself at Iran, a larger intervention in Syria would be exactly the same counterproductive action as the whole Iraq war was. It would function to make Iran stronger. And it would also function to quite possibly resurrect ISIS, but even if it doesn't resurrect ISIS, that doesn't matter. Syria is still going to be 70% Sunni and is not going to be happy about being run by Shia militias. Somewhere between 20 to 30% of Iraq that is Sunni is going to be even further radicalized, whether it's ISIS or Al-Qaeda or some other newfangled thing. The only possible result to escalation in Syria is further disaster. It's not World War III. But it's not just about us in the US. It's about what we have continued to do to this region. What we and Russia and Iran and Saudi Arabia and Turkey and all manner of other elements have continued to do to the suffering people of this region. And this would make it worse. But importantly, it wouldn't just make it worse for the Syrians. It would make it worse for the Iraqis. That place seems supposedly, I don't really buy it, is supposedly becoming more stable. That would go off the deep end again. Lebanon, a country that has tremendously impressed me over the past 6 years. It has taken in, I think, a third, somewhere between a third and a half of its population in Syrian refugees, and has managed to stay stable, still sort of rolling along. That could end. Turkey could be further destabilized. And if the Assad regime fails, you can almost guarantee that there will be millions more refugees heading towards Europe. We've gotten to a point with the election of Macron in France where it's almost possible to be hopeful about the European Union again. Another 2 or 3 million refugees from this expanding war zone will destroy them. So no, World War III is not about to happen. But if the US continues with this approach of continuing to confront the Syrian regime militarily, it will create the conditions that could eventually make World War III happen 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line. We need this war to end. US boots on the ground and the destruction of the Syrian regime is not the way to do it. I'm going to take a quick look at these questions, see if anyone's got it. Well, we've got some participation here. It seems mostly to be people swearing at each other. Jamal Gonan points out that maybe there will be a Pacific War in 20 to 40 years. And I think that actually is the real risk here. That is the thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently. On Tuesday, I made a video about China, the Chinese Communist Party. I think what's important to emphasize here is we have been powerful enough in the United States to pour a tremendous amount of resources into the Middle East region over the, essentially since 9/11, before that as well. But I think the estimates is that the Iraq war thus far has cost somewhere in the region of $1 trillion. And what we're doing here with a war that expands to Iraq, to Syria, potentially to Lebanon, further in the region, is we're making that worse. I don't see how the Syrian war and this broader war in the region can end within the next 5 to 10 years. If we continue to make this worse, we're talking about a 20, 30, 40-year commitment in this region. We have broken these countries and we have bought these countries. We will need to continue to be involved. We're still powerful enough that we can do that. Speaking from the United States, we're still powerful enough that we can do that. We can be so involved in the Middle East, but still also have forces and powers throughout the world. We can still, though it's being hurt, it really is being affected. Our presence in Asia is being affected by the amount of fighters, the amount of missiles, the amount of resources that we use to maintain these Middle East wars. But we've still managed to pull it off. We can still pull it off for the next 10, 15 years or so. But what about after that? Our wars, our global war on terror, even though we don't call it that anymore, has now lasted for 15 years. And I think the current actions of the US government make it likely that it will last for another 15 years. And by that point, I think we'll be getting to a point where China actually has a more serious military and is a more serious strategic competitor to the United States. And Southeast Asia is infinitely more important to US interests than the Middle East. Infinitely, especially in a new era where it'll never be a post-petroleum era, but where petroleum, oil and gas is a commodity like any other. So yes, I think that is how these actions in Syria and Iraq right now can eventually get to a World War III situation. Because China really is the only country of the threats that the United States faces, is the only real country that can eventually challenge the United States. So yes, wasting time and resources in the Middle East could lead to weakness in the Southeast Asia that China might want to take care of. And that would be, take advantage of, and that would be a real problem. Have we got any more questions before I wrap this up? How will it affect Turkey if a World War III starts? So once again, I do not think World War III will start, not immediately. But I do think that a broader conflict in Syria between the United States and Iran and Russia and the Assad regime will be terrible for Turkey. I think that the 6 years of Syrian war that we've seen already has already had a tremendous impact on Turkey. I think it has allowed Erdogan to take advantage of instability to exert his will in ways that he would not have been able to do otherwise. I don't want to get too into detail on this, but I did do a video called "Why is Turkey Such a Mess?" that makes the case for why it's actually the Syrian civil war that has created problems for Turkey. It's worth remembering that back in 2010, 2011, we were at a point where we were talking about Turkey and Syria and Lebanon making great strides and getting to a higher level of development. I think Turkey still is on that path. Turkey is a more powerful and bigger country than is appreciated. But I think a continuing and intensified conflict in Syria between Iran and the United States could derail that progress in Turkey. And it will, I mean, we already see what's happening with the Kurdish issue and the way that the Syrian civil war helped to reignite that issue in Turkey, and I think that could get much worse. So yes, further escalation in Syria would be terrible for Turkey. Let's see here. Oh, Evidentialist says World War III would be so epic. I think Evidentialist needs to read a little more history. All right, unless there's some more questions, I think I am going to close. Thanks for watching. Very pleased that a whole bunch of people showed up to live chat. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. And I'm in the middle of a fundraising thing right now. I am trying to get myself up to US minimum wage by my birthday, coming up soon, July 15th. Really got only another $50-odd to go on Patreon. Would be pretty awesome if we could make that goal. If we can't make that goal, I may actually have to give up. So if you could consider chipping into my crowdfunding thing, that would be awesome. Yeah, oh boy, somebody on the live stream came out with cuck. So I think that's a good sign that it's time to end. Thanks so much. We're not about to get World War III, don't worry. And thanks for watching. Have a good one.